Unveiling the intriguing tale.
Chapter 16 to 20.
The carriage's seat is made of velvet. The walls are adorned with leather panels, and the floor is covered in plush woven carpet. The entire space exudes opulence and is bathed in golden hues. However, I anticipate that as the lengthy journey progresses, the luxurious cabin will likely start to feel cramped. Currently, I find solace in gazing out the window and experiencing the cold breeze passing through the gap in the frame. Our procession is departing from Highbell Castle, accompanied by a dozen other carriages carrying fellow travelers, all of us summoned by Aurelius to Fifth Kingdom. Guards on horseback are escorting us along the winding road atop the icy mountain ridge. The pace is painstakingly slow, yet I don't mind at this moment. I take pleasure in the tranquility of the night, the rhythmic steps of the horses propelling us forward, liberating me from the palace's confines and propelling me towards the unknown. As we move farther away, clouds gather in the sky, signaling the end of the brief respite from the weather. Rain starts descending like shimmering strings, freezing into iridescent lines upon contact with the ground. Nevertheless, our group persists, guards adjusting their hoods and the horses seemingly unperturbed by the frigid temperatures. Even as the carriage slides on patches of ice or jolts over rocks, causing my heart to leap into my throat, our escorts remain composed, and I strive to suppress thoughts of veering off the mountain's edge. Thankfully, the guards and horses navigate the snow with skill. We are destined to travel through the night. Following Aurelius' orders, our plan is to rest during the day, affording the scouts an advantage while keeping watch. Progress will be slow, potentially spanning to weeks, or at best, a week and a half, assuming the weather remains favorable, though it rarely does in this region. While our pace might be slower compared to our Aurelius group, given our lack of travel experience and exposure to the elements, caution dictates our approach. As I observe our cautious descent down the mountain, my breath fogs up the window, prompting me to wipe away the condensation with my gloved hand. These gloves are likely to become familiar companions, scarcely removed until I find refuge within the castle of Fifth Kingdom. This is a minor concession to make in the face of the chilling expanse surrounding me. By the time our caravan completes its descent along the winding mountain road, darkness has fully enveloped the scene. The moon and stars are obscured by thick clouds, leaving the lanterns on the carriages to guide us. Crossing Highbell's Bridge, constructed from shale hewn out of the mountain, the sturdy bricks echo with the rhythm of hooves. The bridge spans the gap between mountain and valley, leading to Highbell City, situated before the vast forest of the pitching pine trees, so colossal that their tops remain hidden, and their girth requires multiple men to encircle. These trees stand tall, their pine needles bearing shades of blue and white. They shed their needles, resembling icicle teeth, dripping with sap that solidifies to form longer, sharper projections. These ancient trees offer the city respite from the mountain winds, their branches absorbing the brunt of wintry gusts and harsh blizzards, forming a protective barrier for the buildings. The city, dwarfed by these arboreal giants, appears almost comical in their presence, even in the darkness. The tallest structures are outshone by the trees behind them. In this moment, the reality of my newfound freedom sinks in. I am truly outside, unshackled from expectations and roles. I've left the palace and the mountain behind. I yearn to witness everything without the barrier of glass, to experience the outside world in all its vastness. When the carriage wheels roll smoothly over the city's paved road, I rap my knuckles against the window. Thorn, seated beside me, jerks his head in surprise at the sound. Ignoring him, I open the carriage door while it's still moving, albeit slowly, and I leap out. Thorn curses and calls for the carriage to stop, But it's too late. I've landed on the ground. A spring in my step as my boots touch down. Thorn steers his horse toward me, his weathered face twisted in a scowl. I can't help but smile. Scowling already. Dig, I jest. Seems like a bad omen for our journey, doesn't it? Back inside, my lady, Thorn retorts, his amusement absent. My grin widens at his seriousness. So, scowling it is. I agree with a nod. But whether you scowl or not, I want to stretch my legs. I feel confined. Thorn narrows his eyes, regarding me from his horse's saddle. I gesture ahead, towards the bustling city streets where people are going about their business. High Bell is safe, isn't it? I inquire, well aware of the answer. Fine, Thorn concedes begrudgingly. But if the weather worsens or you get a cold, you're returning to the carriage. I nod, my triumph hidden beneath a facade of compliance. You know how to ride, I assume, he probes skeptically. I nod again, of course. I'm an excellent horse rider. His doubt is palpable, but he doesn't press further. Your wish then, he says, signaling a guard to bring forward a pure white horse named Crisp. I approach the horse, stroking its nose while noting its features. These horses are bred for cold endurance, with long, shaggy hair covering their bodies, equipped with thick woolen blankets and leg warmers. They're well prepared for the frigid weather. With a soft murmur, I greet Crisp, then proceed to mount him. The act is successful, and as I settle onto the horse, I shoot Thorn a satisfied look, only to find the guard staring at me. In apparent horror, my smile fades. What's wrong? I inquire. Thorn commands everyone's attention. Restoring order to the procession, I observe him with curiosity, but he remains silent regarding the guard's reactions. I turn to the guard beside me, looking for answers. Why were they looking at me like that? The guard blushes beneath his hood, looking embarrassed. Well, it's just that ladies typically don't ride astride. I glance at my posture, straddling the horse. Ah, I forgot about that. I used to ride this way, but propriety wasn't a concern then. Amid snickers from the carriages carrying other saddles, one voice stands out, Polis. Her comment provokes a flush of embarrassment. Should I? The guard dismisses my worry. Riding this way provides more stability for long distances. Don't mind them, he says, gesturing towards the carriages. I tug the reins and press against Crisp's side to guide him, steering away from the mocking comments. Crisp responds smoothly, and relief washes over me as I realize my equestrian skills remain intact. As I ride, I gradually relax, unaffected by the mocking voices. With each passing moment, I soak in the fresh air, grateful to be free from the confines of the carriage. The light rain persists, but my excitement overshadows any discomfort. Crisp's long hair helps ward off the cold, and my well-insulated boots and thick stockings keep me warm, despite the dropping temperature. The picturesque High Bell city at night captivates my attention. Most buildings are constructed from the same grey rock as the mountain, and the uneven cobblestone streets resonate with the clatter of hooves. The flickering street lamps create a mesmerizing path as we wind through the city. Spectators gather to watch the royal procession, their eyes filled with curiosity. To avoid attention, I pull my hood further over my face, concealing my golden hair. Even the inhabitants of the brothel join in the spectacle, hanging out of windows and offering provocative gestures to the guards. One guard to my left coughs uncomfortably, directing his focus forward. I gaze at him and find his embarrassment endearing. "What's your name?" I ask. He glances at me, appearing quite young, perhaps around 20. "Marlowe, miss." "Well, Marlowe, you seem quite popular with the ladies," I comment, indicating the women beckoning to him. His cheeks turn pink, and he seems to remember my identity. "I didn't, I didn't mean to sound disrespectful. I apologize. Relax, I assure him, understanding his predicament. He then glances back at the royal carriages, likely fearing their scrutiny. As long as you treat the saddles with respect, we won't have a problem. Of course, he stammers, flustered. The saddles in this city are probably tougher than the entire army, considering what they endure. Observing the envious and lustful looks from the crowd, I nod in agreement. We can certainly agree on that. Rapid word spread about our group traversing the city, and soon, a growing number of people lined the streets, standing 5 or 6 rows deep. They waved and called out to us with excitement, curious about the individuals within our group and hoping to catch a glimpse of an important person. I kept my gaze lowered, holding onto the reins with gloved hands, cautious not to reveal my face or let my hood slip back. The guards at the front of the procession worked diligently to clear the path, though our progress slowed due to constantly urging people aside to make way for our carriages. Eventually, we veered away from the main road, distancing ourselves from the gathered crowd and venturing deeper into the heart of Hybel. A slight sigh of relief escaped me. When we were no longer under the scrutiny of numerous onlookers, my grip on the reins relaxed. But the respite was short-lived. The farther we traveled, the more the surroundings deteriorated. Hybel transformed before my eyes, evolving from a pristine and magnificent city into a gloomy, run-down slum. I observed this shift warily, noticing that even the sounds here were different, devoid of the cheerfulness that permeated the main road. Instead, all I heard were cries of babies, raised voices of men, and the slamming of doors. Normally, we'd stick to the main street, but since we're headed for the Fifth Kingdom, the southern road is the fastest route out of the city, Marlowe murmured. He rode much closer to me now. Along with Thorn, given the narrower width of the hard-packed road, the buildings on either side of us were no longer crafted from thick stone. They were now made of wood. The structures were shoddily constructed, some leaning crookedly or crumbling, while others sagged with age, as if nature had been trying to weigh them down for years, with nature ultimately prevailing over human efforts. Even the pitching pines seemed more rugged here, their bark jagged and splintered, their branches partly devoid of needles. The lamps along the road grew sparse and eventually vanished altogether. The road itself transitioned from cobbled stone to muddy, icy earth that was churned up by the hooves of the horses. And the smell, the air lost its crispness and freshness, replaced by a stagnant odor that seemed to cling to the dilapidated building's overwhelming sense of urine and sweat. That made my eyes water. "What is this?" I inquired, surveying the grim and desolate part of the city. "The shanties," Marlowe replied. "More cries of babies, more arguments between people, shadows darting down alleys, and stray dogs exploring corners, ribs visible through their scraggly, ice-coated fur." Hybel no longer exuded its picturesque charm. "How long has it been like this?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene. "Always," Marlowe responded with a shrug. "I come from the east side myself, a bit more space, but not much different from this," he admitted. Shaking my head, I observed the puddles on the ground, realizing they weren't from rain, but rather from the filth tossed out of windows. "But Aurelius possesses vast wealth," I said, perplexed. While I might have been naive, I assumed that since Aurelius had been crowned and the palace transformed into pure gold, the entirety of Hybel would have become a prosperous city. I hadn't considered that some of Aurelius's people could be living in poverty right within the city. Why should they? He had the resources to compensate them generously, regardless of their role. Gold should pose no hardship for him, so why were his subjects dwelling in such squalor? "I'm certain he allocates his gold for other purposes, my lady," Marlowe remarked, though I couldn't miss the way his gaze flicked down to the gold-plated armor on his chest, or the guilt that crept into his blue eyes as he surveyed our surroundings. The guards were on high alert, as if they half expected bandits to emerge and attack us, an outcome that, given the setting, I couldn't dismiss as impossible. Some of the people looked desperate enough to resort to such actions. However, as some guards unsheathed their swords, posing an open threat to the ragged people we passed, something within me clenched against my heart, exerting a painful and persistent pressure. Then, when I witnessed children peeking out from behind empty crates or trailing us with wide, hungry eyes wearing clothes that were little more than tattered rags, their faces gaunt from missed meals, their cheeks smeared with cold dirt, the pressure intensified, digging deeper, leaving a lasting bruise, guiding the reins. I steered my horse to block Marlowe's path, pulling up beside the carriage. "My lady," Marlowe called out, and I heard Thorne's expletive as I brought my horse to a halt and dismounted. Landing harder than I intended, I nearly slipped on the icy mud, but the carriage prevented my fall. It had barely stopped when I wrenched open the door, catching it just as it jolted to a halt as I climbed inside. "My lady, we can't remain here." Marlowe's voice came from behind me, yet I paid him no attention. I delved into the velvet seat, my hands rummaging through my belongings. "Get back on your horse," Thorne growled. I rummaged frantically, pushing aside scarves and extra mittens, searching. Found it. I backed out of the carriage and stepped down. Yet our abrupt stop in the middle of the street drew the curious, shadowy figures closer. "Get back on your horse," Thorne ordered again. Just a moment. I didn't look at him, too focused on my search. There a group of them huddled by a water well across the street. Broken buckets and snapped cords scattered around the decrepit water source. I made my way toward them, aware of some of the guards grumbling and the voices in the other. Then, the unmistakable sound of someone dismounting their horse, striding purposefully in my direction. Nonetheless, I continued, heading straight for those children. They were skittish. As soon as they saw me approaching, or perhaps when they noticed the guard trailing me, two of them darted away, their movements smooth as they vanished into the shadows. Yet the smallest one, a little girl of about 4, didn't flee. She stood there in front of the others, watching me as I knelt before her, a total of 12 now, excluding the ones who had fled, all of them undernourished and dirt-streaked, and their eyes, those eyes appeared far older than their years, shoulders slumped with a weariness no child should bear. "What's your name?" The little girl didn't respond, her gaze lingering on my face as if she could perceive the glint of my skin beneath the hood. "Are you a princess?" an older girl inquired, but I smiled and shook my head. "No, are you?" The children scoffed collectively, exchanging glances. "Do you think princesses live in shanties like street urchins?" I lowered my hood and shared a conspiratorial smile. "Perhaps hidden princesses do." Several of them gaped. "You're the golden girl, the one favored by the king." I opened my mouth to reply, but Thorne positioned himself between me and the crowd, his body tense. "Time to move," he stated. I nodded and stood up, not before reaching into the velvet pouch. "All right, you secret princes and princesses, hold out your hands." Sensing my intention, they eagerly thrust their open palms toward me, jostling for position. "No pushing," I reprimanded. One by one, I placed a coin in each hand, and they scurried away as soon as their grubby fingers clasped onto the coins. I wasn't offended or surprised. On the streets, lingering wasn't an option, especially with money or food in hand. These could be snatched away in an instant by someone bigger and more desperate. As I reached the quiet, young girl at the front, I pressed the pouch into her hand, 3 coins still nestled inside. Her eyes widened at the sight, and it was as if her body instinctively recognized the significance. Her stomach growled audibly. Rivaling the hungry stray dogs, I pressed a finger to my lips. "Use one, hide one, and give one away," I whispered. It was a risk, a gamble to give her this much gold. In fact, it was a risk to give them any at all. But I had to hope that she possessed the intelligence and savvy to ensure her safety. The girl solemnly nodded at me, then turned and sprinted away with all her might. A good girl. Courage. Now. I straightened up and faced my guard. Thorn's anger was evident on his face, heavy and dark. I began to open my mouth, ready to tease him or make a witty remark. But I stopped short when I noticed that all the guards had drawn their swords, facing the people who had come out onto the streets. These people had seen me openly distributing gold coins, enough money to incite conflict, perhaps even violence. The ragged, hungry, and desperate individuals dared to inch closer, their eyes fixated on the ornate carriage's gilded accents and the fine armor worn by the guards, mentally calculating the wealth that a single piece of gold could provide. But then their gazes shifted to me, my hair, my face. It dawned on me too late that I hadn't replaced my hood. The king's favored, the woman touched by gold, she's Aurelius's gilded pet. They inched closer despite the guard's stern warnings. Guilt and worry churning within me. Foolish. This was reckless. The tension hung in the air like a taut wire. The people on the brink of snapping, of deciding to seize the opportunity and attack the armed soldiers, in a bid for some of Aurelius's riches. In the blink of an eye, Thorn was there, positioning himself between me and the frenzied man, with a well-aimed shove. Thorn sent the man sprawling, his body landing in a half-frozen puddle. "Step back," Thorn growled, sword raised, pointed at the crowd as a warning. The gathering, advancing crowd hesitated, but they didn't retreat. They remained stubbornly rooted in place. Just as I scrambled into the carriage, Thorn reached me. Slamming the door shut behind me, the carriage jerked forward, and the sounds of guards barking orders and issuing threats filled the air. A nearby scuffle made me start, the noise of fists meeting flesh. People hurling insults at me, spitting at the carriages, cursing the king. I was too afraid to look out the window as we continued on, sitting stiffly on the cushion, berating myself for my thoughtlessness. I knew better than to flaunt wealth in the destitute neighborhoods of a city, but those children, they mirrored my past so eerily. My thinking had been clouded as the shouting grew louder. The horses picked up their pace, moving as swiftly as they could on the muddied and sludgy street. I prayed that no attack would occur, repeating my pleas to the starry goddesses, imploring them to hold the mob at bay. Not because I feared for myself, certainly not because of what they might steal. It was because I didn't want the guards to be compelled to harm them. These people had suffered enough. Poverty like this was an affliction, a wound that King Aurelius had allowed to fester and spread. It wasn't their fault, this desperation, this agonizing deliberation of whether to strike for the chance at a meal, a blanket, or medicine. It was survival, and every single one of us would face that same agonizing choice in their shoes. But thankfully, no one attacked, thankfully. The guards sheathed their swords. Nevertheless, relief eluded me, replaced by an overwhelming sense of guilt. Guilt for dangling that carrot of hope before the starving and then cruelly yanking it away. The golden castle looming on the mountain in the distance must be a constant thorn in their sides, a constant reminder of a horizon they could never reach. I yearned for the sun to rise sooner. I wished my pouch had held more coins. I wished I could have showered the street in gold. Yet beneath the veil of the frigid night, I felt helpless as we pressed onward without further incident, until the last of the dilapidated buildings receded from view. The last haunting face vanished. A bitter realization settled into my bones, a melancholy understanding. If even the city governed by a king of gold harbored such poverty, what hope could the rest of Orea possibly possess. I believed that. The view outside wouldn't worsen after the dilapidated shanties, but I was mistaken. As we approached the outskirts of the city, I strained my eyes against the distance, peering past the flaming torches of the outpost. What? My question was left unfinished as the carriage halted and voices called out. Thorn dismounted his horse and moved forward, while I quickly exited the carriage, my gaze fixed on the indistinct scene ahead. Passing by the carriages carrying the royal saddles, I noticed Roche, an attractive male, peering out the window with a frown. "Do you smell that?" he asked someone inside. I didn't catch the reply, continuing forward. Marlowe joined me as a group of guards conversed with soldiers from the outpost. The outpost itself was a simple stone watchtower, a wall extending into the mountains, serving as a checkpoint for city entry. Moving closer, Marlowe attempted to halt me. "We should wait here." Curiosity drove me to ask, What is that?" straining my eyes. I tried to discern the figures beyond the torches. Despite his desire to make me turn back, Marlowe couldn't dissuade me. An unsettling feeling gnawed at my gut, like a premonition. When I reached about 20 feet away, a nauseating odor hit me. Marlowe, too, faltered, his face contorting with disgust. Suppressing my own discomfort, I pressed on. Finally, among the gathered soldiers, I could piece together the details my senses were conveying. Before Hybel's wall hung a row of roughly a dozen bodies, suspended from weathered branches. These bodies were not ordinary, they were gruesome and repulsive. More than mere corpses or severed heads on display, they were decayed, Marlowe stated grimly, echoing my thoughts. "That's the source of the smell. We've been receiving these gifts from King Rot all week." My throat felt dry, and I covered my mouth and nose with my hand. I didn't need Marlowe to confirm their identities. The emblems on their armor indicated they were King Aldaric's soldiers. He's been sending these to Fifth Kingdom as well, Marlowe explained somberly as Thorn and others conversed nearby, still at some distance from the putrid bodies. "Why?" I inquired. Marlowe shrugged. "Perhaps to convey a message. King Rot wants to show his anger, and that Folk's men didn't stand a chance." "But why send them here?" I pointed out the betrayal. "It wasn't King Aurelius's army that had attacked." Marlowe's shrug indicated uncertainty. He must be aware that King Aurelius was Folk's ally, now ruling Fifth Kingdom. King Rot doesn't seem pleased about it. Discomfort settled within me. I had no desire to experience King Ravinger's wrath firsthand. If he was infuriated enough to send these decomposed bodies, even though Sixth Kingdom's army wasn't responsible for breaching his border, I dreaded to think of his potential response. If he discovered that Aurelius had instigated the attack. Ahead, Thorn issued an order, prompting some soldiers to approach the bodies, while the watchmen returned to their posts. Marlowe and I stood together, observing as the guards removed the rotting bodies, covering their faces with leather to escape the stench. A larger group began to dig a hole in the snow, and one by one, the bodies were placed inside, resembling seeds planted in a gruesome garden. The guards worked together, covering the deceased with snow until only a shallow mound remained to mark their resting place. As the scent of death dissipated, I shivered and huddled in my coat, just as Thorn turned his gaze toward me. Anticipating a confrontation, I muttered to Marlowe, "Prepare for impact." Thorn approached me, sweat glistening despite the cold. His scrutinizing gaze lingered, and I stifled the urge to fidget under his stare, bracing myself for the reprimand. I understood that my actions endangered everyone in the city. My impulsive decision to offer money could have triggered dire consequences, but in that moment, I only wanted to alleviate the kids' bleak lives, if only briefly. Thorn's eyes skimmed my face, and his glare faded into a sigh. "Next time, stay in the carriage." That was all he said before striding away. Barking orders to the men, I exhaled a breath that materialized before me like a thin cloud. Marlowe nudged me. "It wasn't so bad, was it?" chuckling. I shook my head, trailing him back to my carriage. "No, I got off easy." Aurelius would have unleashed his anger upon me for such recklessness. Upon reaching my carriage, Marlowe held the door for me. Stepping aside, "For what it's worth, I admire what you did back there," surprised. I looked at him, but he shrugged bashfully, perhaps embarrassed by his words or my attention. "It was risky and impulsive, but it showed you cared, you saw. You observed. Nobody else would have stopped for them," he affirmed, his tone revealing his background and character. Sadness tinged my cheeks, shaping them into a faint smile. "You would have, Marlowe," I assured him. "You would have stopped too." Despite our recent acquaintance, I felt this truth deep within me. This soldier from the slums wasn't so different from me. Marlowe inclined his head, and I returned his smile before stepping into the carriage, the door closing softly behind me. At least I knew that amidst the likes of King Rot, there were individuals like Marlowe, balancing the world. Our journey continued for a couple more hours until Thorn called for a halt shortly before dawn. We were far beyond the city walls, surrounded by a vast expanse of white snow and the mountains behind us. A plush tent made of canvas and leather had been set up for me near the fire, with fur rugs spread on the ground. Marlowe winked at me from his watch post as I entered the tent, hastily consuming travel rations before settling onto my bedroll. By the time night retreated and the sun dawned, I was cocooned under golden covers, my ribbons snug around me. Riding had left my legs and back sore, though it paled in comparison to the haunting sight of the decayed men and the destitution in High Bell, but I was outside, progressing rather than stagnating, embracing the world instead of hiding from it. So, that counted for something. At least, I had no idea what awaited me in Fifth Kingdom. What challenges would arise? It had only been a single night, yet I had already confronted heart-wrenching poverty and sickening cruelty, but I was fine, despite lacking the security of my former life. The world wasn't overwhelming me. It wasn't breaking me. For now, I was okay. Under my breath, I mutter curses to the divine's underworld as I tightly grasp the reins, battling to remain seated on the saddle. I haven't been riding for long, maybe 30 minutes, at most. The night hangs heavy and misty, with a frozen fog clinging to us as we traverse the icy terrain. Despite having slept all day, I should feel rested, yet I'm worn and heavy, like a wrung-out towel. Gritting my teeth against the tremble in my thighs, I endure the pain. My legs feel like they've been bruised from the inside, matching the visible bruises on the outside. Each step the horse takes makes me wince from the effort. My body aching. The past week has been grueling, even with relatively stable weather. Navigating the freezing cold of the Sixth Kingdom at night is no easy feat. Every night, I struggle to relearn horse riding, and my muscles revolt. I manage to ride for a few hours before I'm practically tumbling off the horse, stumbling back into my carriage. But I resist staying cooped up there. I push myself to endure the strain, to ride and savor the open air. Marlowe keeps me company, always ready with a smile and a tale, providing a sense of freedom and companionship that's hard to express despite freezing. I cherish it. Tonight, though, my thighs and back protest sooner than usual. To make matters worse, my stomach remains unsatisfied. The dried meat I had earlier didn't suffice, and hunger returns swiftly. This night promises to be long. "You okay?" Marlowe questions, smirking. His pale beard has grown since we set out a week ago, and even yet oddly charming. "I'm fine." I fib through clenched teeth, trying to adjust in the saddle to relieve the ache. Instead, I only irritate the horse. Crisp, I reach down, gloved fingers stroking his white fur. Apologies, crisp. Took me months to master staying on a saddle, Marlowe remarks, riding alongside me. His own horse, a serene mare with white and brown hair, matches his pace. Really, I'm sure your superiors love that, I comment, smirking at him. Marlowe grins back. Every fall was rewarded with mucking out stalls. Cleaning horse manure from frozen stables is as unpleasant as it sounds. Lucky you. Well, shanty life didn't involve horses. He responds, devoid of bitterness. Just a simple fact, I can imagine. But once I overcame my fear, I stopped panicking and being thrown off. He pets his horse's neck, evoking a contented chuff from her. I chuckle, your sergeants would be surprised now. Marlowe flashes a grin and sits upright. And you? Ever fallen off or cleaned stalls? Fortunately, no. But who knows what the future holds? I doubt the king's favored will ever touch a shovel, he responds, glancing at me. He would be astonished by my life experiences, the things I've had to do, but I keep silent, as I do about how I truly learned to ride. And from whom? As we ride, I steal glimpses of Marlowe while he isn't looking. Having a friend feels strange, amidst the yearning for fresh air and change. I realize how much I've wished for this connection with another person, not a strategic alliance or driven by politics, society, or desire. Just a simple friendship to people who converse, share stories, and laugh together without ulterior motives. I wonder how it would feel to love someone like Marlowe. It seems it would be effortless, falling into his warmth, embraced by his genuine kindness, perhaps a different life, a different existence. Chillier tonight, Marlowe muses, interrupting my thoughts as I survey the surroundings. True, I concede, sensing the cold. Nighttime travel took time to adjust to. Initially, every distant shadow felt eerie. But now I concentrate on the path set by the guards ahead. The lanterns of the carriages swaying rhythmically. The landscape has changed little since leaving Highbell snow-covered hills and rugged rocks stretch into the distance. We left the outlying villages behind days ago, and mostly, the weather has cooperated, with only occasional flurries or sleet. Crisp's movement jolts me as he navigates a rock, and I grip the reins and my thighs. Inhaling sharply, soreness radiates through my legs. Carriage, a gruff voice interjects, and Thorn rides up beside me. He moves throughout the night, checking on everything and everyone, ensuring our pace and direction are maintained, that everyone stays vigilant. Not yet, I reply, offering a smile to mask my discomfort. He shakes his head, muttering softly. Looks like a storm's coming, Marlowe remarks, reclaiming my attention. You think so? I ask, peering at the sky. Clouds drift across a dimly lit expanse, moonlight struggling to break through. It doesn't appear much different from previous nights. Marlowe taps his nose. I can sense a storm. It's a knack, I hum. And what does an impending storm smell like? Like frozen misery, he quips. Sounds ominous. But the clouds often appear this way. Marlowe shakes his head. Just wait. I sense a fierce storm brewing. Should we make a bet? Marlowe enthusiastically agrees, but Thorn intervenes. No. I turn to him. Why not? No betting with the king's favored. Thorn addresses Marlowe without looking at me. I frown. That's no fun. Thorn shrugs. No fun allowed for the king's favored. I narrow my eyes. You're being unnecessarily harsh. He gives me a patient look before urging his horse ahead, increasing his pace. Fear not, milady, Marlowe interjects. In this instance, Thorn did you a favor. You would have lost the bet. I chuckle, tilting my head to the cloudy sky. Now you're just teasing me. He raises his eyebrows playfully. Shall we make the wager? Then, I'm about to respond when a woman's voice cuts in. A bit immature, don't you think? Polly's voice makes me tense. Her carriage is just ahead of us, and she's leaning out, her blonde head resting on her arm. She regards me with disdain, her hostility evident. I hope that traveling with the other royal saddles would warm their attitudes towards me, but it hasn't. We mostly remain apart. I haven't exchanged more than fleeting glances with the others. They stay in their carriages or shared tents, and I stay in mine. None of them attempt to converse with me, except for Polly. However, it's less about conversation and more about showcasing her dislike. I'm pretty certain that making bets is the second most common pastime among men in this realm. And they don't call it immature, I retort. Second most common. Then what's the first? Marlowe echoes. I smirk. I allowed Chris to slow down into a gentler canter, feeling the final remnants of my hope to connect with the other riders fade away, resembling the sputtering end of a wet candlewick. It was time to accept this reality and find solace in having at least one friend among the travelers, a single companion, along with a stern, protective guard who had taken a life to save mine. It was far more than I ever anticipated. After some minutes of brooding in solitude, Marlowe approached me as I had expected. He trotted up beside me and said, "Pay no mind to Polly. She's just envious." I responded with a wry look, feigning indifference. "Ignore her. Just like you ignored freely yesterday." His cheeks reddened slightly, and he quickly turned away. "What? No, nothing happened. She simply needed an extra blanket, that's all." Trying to lighten the mood, I teased, "Relax, I'm only teasing." Marlowe glanced around apprehensively, seemingly worried about misconceptions. I understood the concern. Royal saddles were meant solely for royalty, and even the slightest rumor could harm both Frilly and Marlowe. I wasn't going to let that happen. "Any girls back home pining for your attention?" I asked, genuinely curious about his life beyond the military, away from armor and swords. Marlowe's boyish charm resurfaced as he leaned closer, saying, "Just a handful, 3 or 4, although they don't pine as much as I wish they would." A chuckle escaped me. "Is that so? Well, I hope you treat them well." He responded with a grin. "I treat them very well. This boy from the shanties has a few tricks up his sleeve." Another laugh escaped me. "Care to share these tricks?" Marlowe eagerly began to answer, but Thorn reappeared at my side, interjecting with a scowl. "No sharing tricks with the king's favored," he snapped in frustration. "Do you want King Aurelius to use your head as decoration, boy?" Marlowe paled and shook his head. "No, sir." With a sigh, I looked at my perpetually grumpy guard. "Lighten up." "Dig," he responded gruffly. "Carriage," I replied sweetly. "No, thank you." He sighed at my stubbornness, and I found some amusement in his exasperation. It might not be a drinking game, but getting under Thorn's skin was oddly enjoyable, and it seemed he was engaging in more conversations with me than before, a definite win. As the group continued onward, one after the other, Marlowe entertained me with stories from his childhood, growing up amidst 4 older brothers. His tales distracted me from the discomfort in my legs. Overhead, the clouds churned like an agitated sea, releasing icy mist into the air. The lead horses trudged through the snow, creating a path for the rest of us, but even with their efforts, plowing through thick snow was exhausting for both horses and riders. Thorn frequently rotated the lead horses due to the demanding effort. As the night progressed, the temperature plummeted, numbing even my aching thighs. When the wind intensified, Marlowe wisely refrained from boasting about predicting the storm. Soon, everyone braced against the biting wind, bodies hunched to shield against the cold, cloths wrapped around faces and heads to repel the cutting chill. Thorn returned to my side, his heavy cloak billowing around him. "Carriage," he ordered this time. I nodded, yielding this time because it would be foolish not to seize the chance to escape the frigid elements. The sky's warning gave us time to prepare, before the clouds unleashed their fury, and although I enjoyed riding in the open, I had no desire to brave a blizzard. Alongside Marlowe, I directed Crisp toward my carriage. Disembarking, my feet sank into the deep snow, almost up to my knees. "Are you okay?" Marlowe shouted, leading Crisp toward me. All I could do was nod, as the wind would have snatched my words away. Using the stirrup, I hoisted myself up, and once I was seated, Marlowe took hold of the reins, guiding our horses through the heavy snow. Squinting against the wind, I glanced back at the other carriages, now stuck as well, wheels trapped by the deep snow. Guards scrambled and shouted, working to free the horses and assist the other riders, all while leading everyone towards the shelter of the trees. Once Marlowe and I reached the trees, we found immediate relief from the hail. Some pellets still managed to find their way through the branches, but the intensity had lessened. Guards chopped wood and erected tents, building a fire with determined efficiency. When they attempted to ignite the fire, it sputtered and smoked, the wet wood resisting combustion, until Thorn stepped forward, stern as ever. A strike of his flint produced sparks that caught the kindling without hesitation. Marlowe guided me to where the other horses were congregated, a space cleared of snow for them to rest, with a bale of hay already prepared. Dismounting, I was ready to help Marlowe with Crisp, but he insisted I sit and warm up while he tended to the horses. He directed me to a fallen log by the growing fire, and I sat down, feeling fatigued and shivering to my core, the cold penetrating even my bones. The other riders joined us, taking seats on various logs around the fire, huddling close for warmth. I watched as guards chopped and stacked wood, set up tents, moved trunks, and shoveled snow to create a windbreak. Not one of them remained idle. While I shivered by the feeble fire, extending my gloved hands toward the flames, guards stacked lightweight bricks nearby, and I knew each one would be taken as soon as they were heated, placed in sleeping bags to warm our feet as we rested. The guards worked swiftly and efficiently, their speed impressive. Eventually, everyone gathered around the fire, tents scattered where gaps in the trees allowed. Hail continued to fall, ice pellets ricocheting off bark and branches, leaving splintered wood in their wake. The hail striking trees sounded like small explosions, while the branches overhead creaked under the force of the wind. It had been a matter of time before the storm hit, and we were fortunate to have enjoyed mild nights for as long as we had. I spotted Marlowe on the left, setting up my tent, and I walked over to where he was busy securing the tarp and pulling the fabric taut. "Need any help?" I asked, raising my voice to be heard over the hail. Thorn walked by with my fur blanket rolled in his arms. "No, you're not here to help. We're here to serve you, Miss Ilander, not the other way around." Marlowe chimed in. "That's good, because I have no idea how to set up a tent," I joked, earning a laugh from Marlowe. After assembling the tent, Marlowe and Thorn quickly arranged furs inside, along with my lantern, which would provide both light and a bit of heat, despite the proximity to the larger fire. I felt somewhat guilty for the special treatment, especially knowing that guards and other riders would be sharing tents with 5 or 6 others. Whereas I had a tent to myself, at least they could share body heat. I devoured my portion of rations and boiled water with haste. Before retiring to my tent early, there was still a few hours of night left, but we wouldn't be able to resume traveling 4 hours due to the storm's intensity. As Marlowe saw me approaching, he stood up from the stump next to my tent, the spot where he would keep watch while I rested. He held the tent flap open for me. "Seems you lost that bet, didn't you?" I teased. "Oh, but I never actually got to place the bet, did I?" Marlowe laughed and shook his head. His ability to maintain good humor regardless of the circumstances spoke volumes about his character. "You got lucky this time. I won't let you off so easily next time. Consider me warned. Good night, my lady. I ducked into the tent, tying the flaps closed, before quickly shedding my clothes and changing into a thick woolen nightgown. I burrowed beneath the furs, leaving my boots by the lantern to dry. The hot brick at my feet offered blissful warmth. Though I knew it wouldn't last, the hail pounded the tent, and the wind pierced through every layer, chilling me to the bone. The once steady weather had shattered into a tumultuous storm, hurling shards from the sky. Outside, the tempest raged like a foreboding omen. I would realize too late that I should have heeded its warning.
Make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell for the next episodes. Thank you.